Okay, welcome back everybody for our closing plenary talk. It's my pleasure to introduce Suzanne Fergus to give our final plenary. I've known Suzanne for quite a long time. Suzanne is a Professor of Learning and Technology Enhancement in the School of Life and Medical Sciences at the University of Hertfordshire. And Suzanne's got a wide range of contributions to higher education pedagogy, spanning from context-based learning, technology, enhanced learning, work on assessment, particularly exams and practical work. And more recently, I think done a lot of work on cognition, and I think recently published books, Study Smarter, which really collects a lot of that guidance and toolkits for students to actually how to learn. I think we're going to learn a little bit more about that this afternoon. And all those contributions have been widely recognised. Suzanne's won Royal Society of Chemistry Higher Education Prize, National Teaching Fellowship, and Principal Fellowship at the Higher Education Academy. So real recognition of Suzanne's contributions, and hopefully we'll learn a lot more about that today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Neil, for your kind words, and thank you, everyone. I know it's the last talk of the conference and it's hot, so I feel it too. Well done, everyone, get this far. What exactly is this white powder? How pure is it? I teach organic chemistry, so my students, when they're learning about functional groups, when they're learning about structural determination of molecules, this is exactly the real world problem that they can apply their learning to. My talk today, I really want to bring together and share with you some specific strategies that you can engineer, not only in learning activities that you are involved in, but also for students when they're doing their more independent study in their own time. Although my examples will be chemistry related because that's my discipline, I really want, and my intention is that all of you can hopefully take something away that you can apply within your context. So, what is the first step in learning? I ask my students this on the very first day, the first years. I go, what's the first step in learning? And they usually look at me and think, what's she asking this for? Because it's the last talk, I have to get a cute animal photograph in here. But if anybody has trained a puppy, the first step in learning is we have to use our senses, attend to information. And if you've ever tried to train a puppy, you know that without that puppy's attention, you're not going to get very much learning or training taking place. So we have to attend to information. So back to how do I engage my 18-year-old students who are learning pharmacy and pharmaceutical science, and no, my answer is not white powder, but this is related to one of the ways that I will engage students. Back in about 2009, legal highs became widely known within society. They're a recreational drug that are taken as a stimulant. They are psychoactive. At that time, in about 2009, you could purchase on the internet white powders, like here, like what I showed you in the vial, or in head shops that were legally functioning on the streets. They could go in and purchase white powders. We actually purchased white powders from internet sources. Those white powders, in this case, methadone was probably the most widely known and publicized of these psychoactive drugs. It was called MCAT, Meow Meow, Bubble, Spicy, all very trendy names for the generation of users that these compounds were targeted for sale to. When they were purchased, they were sold not for human consumption. That's not the case. They were being purchased for human consumption for recreational purposes. They were either sold as plant food, baths up. We don't know. The label says methadone. What is that white powder? Is it actually what the label suggests it contains? And that's what we were interested in from our research perspective in chemistry and also in analytical chemistry. Just to explain to you, methadone is a synthetic compound related to cathinone. Cathinone, it's like amphetamine, so it has that amphetamine-like effects. It's a bit milder. Cathinone is a natural compound present in the cat leaves, hence why methadone was called meow meow. It was all playing on the words of cat. Cathinone itself it's produced, it's made, it's sort of distributed in from Ethiopia, Yemen, parts of the Arabian Peninsula. It's the second most sort of distributed after coffee. Cathinone, it's taken for recreational purposes. It's very much part of the culture. So it is a natural compound. So we were able to really understand what these white powders contain. In all our cases of methadone, it wasn't methadone that these white powders contained. It was typically caffeine, which is a stimulant, as we know, lidocaine, which is a local anesthetic. So there would be an effect for users when they consumed these white powders. And there was lots of other bulking agents as well present. So this was very much a real world scenario that we were, looking at within our research. So we were able to bring that into the student activities, particularly for our second year students, where they were learning about structure determination. So again, it was giving them some spectra, some data, real world problems, and they were able to apply what they were learning through that. And the students found it really interesting. It was engaging. They could really understand, why am I learning this? It's always about answering the why in learning. So that's what I'm suggesting here. It's around, how can we help our learners, our students, to appreciate why? It's creating curiosity. So what's your hook? I've showed you here, I started my talk with that question, a provocative question. I had a visual aid as well. I use this with my students in exactly the same way. It could be that you're sharing a fact, a statistic related to whatever it is that the students are going to be engaging with that session, with that learning activity. It's creating an open loop. Don't know about you, but when I'm ever watching TV and I recognize somebody who's the actor, I'm thinking, where have I seen them before? What's the thing I next do? I don't just sit there and start, oh, it's fine. Yeah, kind of, I recognize them. I grab my phone and I start Googling, who are they? And then it's like, then I can relax once I know, oh yes, that's where I've seen them before. Because my brain, human brain, created this open loop. We want to close the loop again. So that's the idea. It's that hook, creating curiosity. It's like, what's the answer? What's the answer? It's like using a question at the very beginning of a lecture. The students will be, what's the answer? What's the answer? Sometimes, depending on what it is that you're teaching, sometimes it's not obvious what that link is, what kind of potential hook can be used. So I decided just to utilize a bit of generative AI. I know, Farani, you were mentioning that in your talk this morning. I wanted to also show that we can use it in a positive sense as well. Great for brainstorming, just to get ideas. So I just put into ChatGPT, which is the platform that I tend to use most. How do I contextualize? So this is about contextualizing learning for students. And link, for me, it was the topic of functional groups, inorganic chemistry to the real world. And I just put that question into ChatGPT. And you know what? The results were not that bad. It gave me ideas. It was something that I could look at and go, yeah, maybe I could use a little question like that around, why does chili burn your mouth and mint makes it feel cold? That might be a way that I could just use that little hook with my students at the start of a session, or particularly for my pharmacy students, it may be holding up a box of aspirin or paracetamol or ibuprofen. And again, creating that curiosity, asking a question, making it relevant, helping to answer the why in students' minds. So that's what I'm suggesting, is start with why, not what, rather than definition. Today's lecture is about with why. There is a cautionary note with this. Be careful of cognitive overload. Be careful of the level of study that your students are at. If the hook, the context becomes the focus, where it's too complex, it's overwhelming, there's too much information presented, that actually will have the opposite effect and hinder learning. So although it may be interesting, it may actually hinder that cognitive processing. So just be careful around, it may just be a question, but we're not going to be diving into all of the details around that context. So again, you'll be able to gauge that depending on the level of your students. Okay. Power of questions. I've talked about questions there in relation to engagement, in relation to motivation. I'm now going to have a look a little bit more at learning. So questions are very, very powerful. And I'm now going to focus a little bit more on what students do within their own studying. I presented again this to my students. So I want you to consider 3 groups. We have students in Group A. In Group A, they all study for the same amount of time, A, B, and C, for 20 minutes. If you ask anyone here, never mind students, what is it that we want more of? And it's usually time, probably money as well, but it's time. We're time poor. So students would say the same. Group A, they are studying for 20 minutes. Studying means they are reading text. They are reading that information that is presented to them. 5 minutes, break, 5 minutes, break, do something else, 5 minutes, 5 minutes. So 20 minutes in total. That is their study condition in this group. Group B are studying for 15 minutes. And for the final 5 minutes of that 20 minutes, they are actively recalling. In other words, take out a blank piece of paper. How much of this can I remember or be able to explain from what I have been studying? Group C then are doing 5 minutes of that studying, that reading that information, and then they are testing themselves for 15 minutes. Which of these groups would you say are your students, the pattern of study that your students adopt? Most of mine will be either A or B. Some A, some will be, they'll say, right, I study and then towards the end, then I'll test my knowledge. I'll do a test and see how much of this have I understood. And that's my way of practicing, preparing for the exam. Very few will actually do C. There is then a test a week later. This is published research, not my own research, but it's published research from cognitive psychology. This is what really surprised me when I first got introduced and started looking more into cognitive psychology of learning, looking into what does the evidence suggest? Because it wasn't what I thought it would be. Now, I'm not going to ask you for time purposes, but I would sometimes, if we were doing another session, I might get you all on your phones, do Mentimeter, and we'll do a vote and we'll see what you think, what would be the average result for A, B, and C. And I asked the students this, what's their study pattern like and what would they predict? So a week later, 40% Group A. I've seen research published where it's less than that. So it's between 30 and 40%. For us at undergraduate, 40% is a pass. So it may or may not reach that pass level, which is the way a lot of students are studying. 56% for B. Remember, they're all studying for 20 minutes. At the same time, it's just how they study is different in this. And what's surprising, Group C, an extra 20% difference between Group A and C, just purely based on what they do within that 20 minutes. What really strikes me about this and what I want to emphasize is that there is this misconception. This is retrieval practice. That retrieval practice is a way of evaluating the product of a previous learning episode. It doesn't produce learning, it tests and evaluates learning. Whereas actually it does produce learning, and that's the power of the testing effect retrieval practice. To show you as well, because I wanted to bring in an active learning comparison, which is concept maps, which is where students will use open resources. They create meaningful relationships using a structured, organization of knowledge in a concept map. And most students, when they were asked their subjective opinion on which was better, where they did the retrieval practice, testing themselves, how much of this can I remember, testing, versus the concept map, the prediction error, the majority of students would predict that the concept mapping was better. Whereas actually the empirical evidence shows that the retrieval practice is more powerful. So it's that idea of what feels like good learning isn't always what produces good learning. So going back, if I go back to this slide here, most of my students are doing A or B. I've interviewed students on their study approaches. I had one student, she was so determined and really wanted to do her best. Like all of our students, they want to do their best. They're committed at university. Maybe not all, I shouldn't say all of them, not all, but a lot of our students are. And I talked with her and she was getting so frustrated. And I was like, well, tell me what you do. And she said, I write out my notes again and again. And I was like, okay, what do you mean you write out your notes? Is that you're adding information, you're making sense of it? No, I write them out neater. She had a plaster on her finger. She was right-handed. And I was like, what happened to your finger? She said, that's from the pressure of writing. I inside was thinking, stop doing this, because she was putting so much effort into her study and writing out her notes verbatim, which is basically or reading your notes over and over. And it felt like she was being productive. And I asked her the question, and I said, when it comes to you, testing on this, how much of it can you actually remember to be able to explain those concepts? And that's where she looked at her shoes and it's like, well, that's the problem. I can't. So I could really understand her frustration. And it's not because her motivation wasn't there or commitment to learning wasn't there. It's that the approach to studying is not effective. It feels good. It feels productive. The more you read something, the more familiar it is. So if students say, it feels like I'm doing well at this, it feels like I'm learning this. Good learning is not comfortable. This approach, where you have to test yourself, where you don't have your notes ahead of you, that does not feel comfortable. So there is this, difference between what is the subjective experience of learning and actually what is the empirical evidence towards good learning. So to keep that in mind, that good learning doesn't always feel like good learning. Okay, so we talked about the testing effect and how powerful that is. We know a lot of our lecture content as well is recorded now. So online learning is one aspect where students are engaging with material. It's not always in person. They may be following up on a recording, or they may be watching things that are recorded. Yes, they may watch it at different speeds. That's not what I'm focusing in on. But what's the challenge with online learning, or even any online meeting that we've all been in? Distractions, mind wandering. Yes, you start going into other places in your mind. Maybe some of you are sitting there thinking, what am I having for dinner this evening? Yes, it's getting to that time. That's one of the additional challenges with online delivery, is that element of mind wandering, not just thinking about things that are associated with what is happening within that session, but where it's completely unrelated. So this is a 20-minute online statistics lecture. So we're bringing in some of that statistics anxiety that was talked about before today in one of the talks. 3 conditions: tested, which is where there is a quiz after every 5 minutes. There's a quiz at the end. So again, this is the testing effect. Restudy. The restudy component of this was simply the students read through the learning outcomes for that lecture. They just read through the learning outcomes. Again, the control group, they did something completely unrelated, like a puzzle. They all had a quiz at the end. They were also asked the question, are you mind wandering? Given what I've been talking about, the power of the testing effect, the power of retrieval practice, it may be no surprise when I show you the result in that the test a week later, the highest performance was in the testing effect, where every 5 minutes there was testing, asking questions. And also there was less mind. I use this with my students. I show this data to them to help them understand why we're giving them study skills advice towards this is how you can study smarter. When you're watching things online, please don't just watch it like Netflix, where you're just going to sit and watch through the whole lecture recording, passively engaging with it. No, stop it. Ask questions. How does this relate to this? What does this mean? Do I understand this? It's that processing of engaging with the content that is going to be more powerful. So questions lead to learning. That's the big take-home message here. Not just testing, not just checking learning, but actually producing learning as well. So it's that use of questions as being so powerful. Now, I know there was a talk from that lady from Sheffield who said, yes, students want more practice questions. Yes, they do. That's the general thing. Give us more questions, especially when I show them the power of testing. We want more questions now that you've said that testing our learning is going to be really powerful. We want more. And I go, okay, yes. So what I did this year for my students coming up to the exam, they knew reading the slides over and over was not going to be what I was suggesting would help them. So I went on to, again, ChatGPT, and I thought, I'm just going to throw in, I didn't upload any content onto ChatGPT. I simply just put in the prompt, generate for me questions. Now, I read through them all. I took some out that weren't relevant to what had been taught in those lectures. It just wasn't part of what the curriculum was. And after removing those irrelevant questions, I had 45 short answer questions, tested recall, tested understanding, some application as well. And my suggestion to my students was, don't just read your notes, start with the questions. Start with the questions and have a go at using them in your revision. So it's going to be a much more effective way for them to use questions in their learning. But this is, again, using the power of something like ChatGPT. It's not saying you've got to sit down and start making lots more questions. How about flipping the student role? This was something that we've been doing for up to 10 years now at the University of Hertfordshire, where we're using a platform, and I know it was also mentioned in one of the talks today, but it's flipping the role of students because, yes, answering questions is very powerful for their learning. How about they author questions? They write the questions, they create the questions. So flipping that role on its head for them. And there is a really useful platform that allows the creation of multiple choice questions. Students create multiple choice questions. They share them with their peers in a safe environment online. That is, only those students that are registered on that particular course can see each other's questions. They're able to answer each other's questions, give feedback. There's gamification elements within it. And most importantly, in today's climate, it's free to use. If you're ever going to have to go to your head of department and say, we've got this idea of using a particular technology, the next question is, what does it cost? Well, it's free. So that is always a plus, but like any piece of technology, it's thinking around, why are we using this? How is it going to support my students? The reason I was really interested in using PeerWise, I have students in first year. Some have done A-level chemistry, others have not. Those that have done A-level chemistry, they use those two words that shut down learning. I know. Oh, I know this. Yeah, I know this. Yeah, we've done this already. I know this. And as soon as you start saying, I know, the brain, yeah, permission to wander. That's what happens. The brain starts to shut down and we can start thinking about something else. So I have students who are like, I know all this before. It's easy. They need to be stretched. I have other students who are afraid of chemistry. Yeah, they realize that they find it difficult, or they feel that they're behind their peers in relation to their learning of chemistry. So they want more support. So what's really useful with PeerWise is it stretches the students who have got a knowledge base already. And then for those students who want more practice, they've now got a bank of questions that they can use to go through those topics themselves in more detail and get extra practice on that. So it's a really nice platform from that point of view. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to adopt it, to address what was a challenge for my students. Just in terms of student engagement, looking at some of the data, 95%, the reason it wasn't 100 was some of the students had withdrawn in that first semester. So it was slightly less than, but it was, for all intents and purposes, it was 100% student engagement. They had to create 2 questions. Students created just 2 questions, not 5, not 10, 2. Writing questions is not easy, as they found out. So we did a workshop at the beginning to introduce this. Oh yeah, that's fine, we'll write questions. Oh, it's not easy to come up with good distractors. It's not so easy to come up with good explanations and think of questions that are beyond recall, which was part of the criteria. It was recall plus application. In terms of commenting on questions, they went above that. And really, in terms of answering questions, they went above the intended criteria for that assignment. We had 2 students who answered 95 questions. Nice. So that's an endorsement from the students. They weren't required to answer 95 questions or even anything beyond the 5. So in terms of student engagement here, no surprise in terms of that human behavior close to the deadline. There is that spike in activity for PeerWise. They had a midterm test, so that was the rationale for using PeerWise. It was that feed forward to support their preparation for the midterm test, get them used to what the assessment format was like. What was really nice to see, they weren't encouraged to engage with PeerWise beyond that. some of them did ahead of their exams, and those students that had to come back and do it all again, they also felt that, you know, using that peer-wise resource bank was going to support them. That was their choice, which is always nice to see. So yes, there was good engagement. As a revision tool, I'm not going to say, oh, it's absolutely wonderful. Not all students use peer-wise to support them in their revision, particularly for that midterm test. There was positive comments in the questionnaire, but in this questionnaire that we had, 26 students didn't engage. Lack of time, just time pressure with other assignments coming up to it. They said, yeah, I knew it was there, just didn't have time to really use it. Fair enough. There was also an element of not sure I trust questions that are written by other students. Although they police the bank of questions with each other, they can flag if there's any issue. They actually are, that's one of the powerful aspects of it. They can highlight if there are any problems or queries and rectify those themselves within their own learning. But for some students, they wanted only questions that the lecturer had written. So there is also that, where is, you know, trustable source of knowledge from? For some first year students, it was, yeah, that was an issue for them. And for others, it was just that lack of self-regulation. Other things took over, distractions, various things. They weren't able to engage with it. So this is towards the end now of my talk. I hope you able to take something away. I wonder what that might be, that one thing that you might be able to take away from the talk. Because it's the end, I do want to wish and thank Joe very much and the organising committee for a fantastic conference and for inviting me to this. I want to thank you as well for sticking this out on this hot afternoon, and thank you for your attention.
So, do we have any questions?
Great talk. I was very interested in the data you showed about the quiz test thing. And I just wondered if any potential like student neuro to account when generating that data, if that was to or considered.
Not that I've read in the pay. I think no, I haven't seen that. It's something it is a topic that we all are more aware of, but it's not been mentioned in those research studies. It may be that they were from, I think, 2011. Yeah. It may just be that there could be other studies, but I haven't seen it mentioned. So thank you.
Come straight to the back, but I do have an online question. It says, having been an SSSS student, so that was group A, do you notice a gender divide in the ABC groups in your experience?
No, I haven't seen that. I think for me it's more of an informal, in the class I'll find out, but for most of my students it's A. They will tell me as well, they walk around the library reading their notes over and over. They will do a practice sample paper or some past paper after their study period before the test. So that would be condition B, but most of them are not doing option C. Yeah.
I've got a question. I love the multiple choice because I've been doing that for about 7 or 8 years now myself. And I love the fact that all those things you said about it, students not wanting other students' questions, because I do it as a students as partners approach, and I can let them vote on how many student generated questions should go on the exam.
Okay.
And I give them a choice of 10% up to 50%. Guess what they choose? It's never been above 20%. And the other thing they really find difficult is writing the distractors. But I do have a little resources for them too, like you do, so that they can support to do it.
Yeah. What I like with peer-wise, it's not just writing the question and the distractors, and I agree it's hard, but they also have to write the explanation. And that's, some of the students I interviewed, they were saying it took me 5 hours to write this question. And actually, yeah, to really think about this topic and understand it, so powerful for their learning and that topic, but it's not straightforward. So it is hard. It's hard for us sometimes to write good questions. I have to walk away and then come back to it again. It's not always that easy. Yeah. Questions? There's questions down the front here as well.
I just wondered, is it also incumbent on us to model that behaviour? Because, one of my bugbears is, some people who just lecture for 50 minutes and just talk, whereas actually what we need to do is talk for 5 minutes and question, talk for 5 minutes, question. So I don't know, do you promulgate that within your department?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things I will always say to colleagues when we're looking at staff development and good practice is, if you're the one doing all the talking for a 50-minute lecture, yeah, that's a clue that perhaps there's less of that active learning strategy. So it's creating that safe environment, because you'll know some students, you'll ask a question, it'll be the same people who'll answer. That's why I mentioned Mentimeter. It's more inclusive, the quiet learner. I too would never have answered a question when I was an undergraduate student. I was thinking, I was engaged, but you wouldn't have heard my voice. That wasn't because I wasn't listening or wasn't taking part. So it's coming up with inclusive ways that support all students, give variety, mix it up, so that it's not predictable. If it becomes predictable for you and for your students, it's like, oh yeah, we know what this is. So it's create a little bit of interest.
So going back to the 3 groups, so has anybody kind of done any research about a 4th group potentially, which is TSTT? So test before study, and then test and test. The reason why I asked that question is that it's almost like we assume students to kind of learn something and then test to kind of get the recall or to work out if they actually understand what they have studied or not. But then in a sense, to actually get them curious, it would be good to actually test them first to establish actually, you don't really know that much. And then they can start to go into doing the study, and then the test recall bits would probably be more effective. I don't know, but has anybody done that?
I haven't seen it published, but what I suggest and propose to my students, I say, take the lecture outcome, which I would never read out to them, but they're always there. I go, that the most underused resource that you're given, I say, turn them into questions. Now you have the syllabus, because they all go, what's the syllabus for, our module? So I'd say, turn them into questions and test yourself first, and then do the S bit. So I would always encourage that, or sometimes I've used questions where I know they probably won't be able to answer the question. So I'll present a question at the beginning and I get them to vote, and it's all over the place. And then we go, interesting. And then they're like, what's the answer? And then I continue. And then they're like, what was the answer? And then at the end, we present the same question again. So it's that creating a hook, but it's also that element of the testing and then closing that loop with some studying and then testing again. So although it's not been shown, like I can't give you some lovely research data that has, all that evidence, absolutely, there would be ways of using that within a practical sense, of using testing and then going back and studying where there are gaps or where there's some, gap in that cognitive bridge, and then, testing again.
Is there time for any more questions? I don't know. Yeah.
Hi, thanks so much. I've never used Peerwise, so sorry if this is a naive question, but you said that there's like the ability for students to flag and sort of, this question is not right or what. Have you ever used that to kind of inform your practice and then sort of say, okay, this part of the syllabus they're clearly all struggling on, or this is the question that they're coming up with, so this is a part that obviously you want more testing in, and then like develop sessions or drop-in sessions or anything on specifically those topics?
It's a great question. I haven't used Peerwise specifically for that. Peerwise is very much a student-led. It's to create that community where they are supporting each other to learn. And if they flag a question, yes, but it's not meant to be instructor intensive for me to go through. I mean, I would have 500 questions particularly. I'm, just not going to have that resource. However, the point you make, I have used, particularly in exams, where I recognized errors. And they're the kind of errors that I think, were they even in the lecture? Where are they getting that from? Because they're not the errors that I would come up with, but they clearly are the student errors that they have in their understanding. And I then used them and built them into exemplars. I know exemplars were mentioned before, where I created exemplar where I engineered that error into it, because I know students have had, a challenge with that. And then I get the students to look at these different exemplars and mark them. And that's a great way then for me to revisit that concept in a different way. So I have used where students have challenges, but not necessarily from Peerwise, but I have used it from their answers in that way. Okay, I don't